Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 914. I had the white pieces and started off with e4. And my opponent went d5 here, the Scandinavian defense. And not only did he play the Scandinavian, but he played it the same way I do. So after I take, he plays, instead of queen takes d5, the main line, he plays knight to f6, the second choice. I played d4 here, the main move. And he plays knight takes d5. And I go with knight f3. c4 immediately is a line as well. I play knight f3, and he plays the bishop g4 line. And I've played that myself, but you can also play with g6. It's actually a little more popular to play with g6. But after bishop g4, this is kind of an interesting position. It looks like there's a little bit of pressure that black has on white's position, pinning the knight and trying to undermine this pawn here. But some of this pressure is a little bit of an illusion. So let's see. Once again, you can play c4 right away, or you can play bishop e2 first. That's the way I played it. He went c6, or rather, he went e6. He could also have played knight to c6 there. And I went with c4. You see, it's not the top choice here. The top choice is castled, but you saw c4 also was a move in previous lines. And after c4, there's still lines in the database here. Normally, black should go back to b6. Anyway, I just wanted to point out, even though there's no moves, there's no games in the database, or very few, this is a pretty normal position for the Scandinavian. And if he went with knight b6, here's kind of the wrinkle I wanted to show you. You can just go ahead and castle here, and then normally black will just develop. If he tries something tricky like bishop takes f3, you can take back. And the idea is that, black has pulled the bishop away from defense of the c-pawn, but it's not yet safe to take that because the bishop is threatening to take here, not only winning the pawn, but also winning the rook in the corner. So black has to play knight to c6. And even here, you don't have to worry about defending the pawns. You can even play knight to c3 here. So it's just that white's active development here. Notice that black hasn't castled, and this bishop hasn't been developed, so white's king is stuck in the center there for a couple moves more at least. And it's a bit dangerous for black to go pawn grabbing at this point. Well, once again, let's see, we can talk about knight takes d4 here, but that runs into bishop takes, and then if he attacks the bishop can come back here and just defend the pawn. So that kind of holds on to everything, and you still have a big lead in development. So you're not going down material there. And then let's see, there was another line here. If he tries knight takes c4 here, then you can actually push this pawn forward to d5. Takes, and now this knight is in trouble. So it comes back here to e5, and you can play queen h5. You can just play on a pawn down and just go for the attack. And this is actually quite a strong position for white as well, because of the, you can put a rook here opposite the king pretty quickly. It's just a good position for white. It's well worth the pawn sacrifice. So that's the point here. If the knight goes back to b6, putting pressure on those pawns, you don't actually, black doesn't actually get as much out of it as you might think, and white doesn't need to be afraid of those lines. But when black goes with the knight to f6, there's no pressure on these pawns at all, so it's even easier. But I have gotten into trouble with white. If you play a little too defensively, if you worry about defending these pawns in the center too much, you can get into a passive position. So I just wanted to point out that little wrinkle. Let's see, he went knight b6 here. I continued knight c3, and we're just out of the opening book at this point, so let's just continue. Played c6, went h3, kicking his bishop, and the chess engine really likes this position for white after the bishop retreat, although it thinks knight e5 immediately is a bit of a mistake. It would play castles here. I don't quite understand the difference, honestly. It would go queen c7 and then play knight e5. It seems to me like it's pretty much the same, but well, he has moved the queen to c7 here. Queen takes, say bishop to d6, hitting the knight, and knight dropping back to d3 was given as a pretty big advantage to white. You can see black still needs to develop. This bishop has a good square to come out to. this threat on this diagonal does not do a whole lot in this particular position. The king can just go to h1. So seems like a good position for white, although I wouldn't rate it as highly maybe as the chess engine does. Anyway, I went knight e5 immediately. He took, and I took back with the knight. Oh, that is the difference. The difference is that I had to take back with the knight instead of taking with the queen. I was really planning to take back with the queen, and then I noticed this pawn was hanging. So delaying knight e5 for a move and waiting until this pawn is not under attack would be a little better. Okay, so that's the difference between knight e5 right away and knight e5 a move later. Anyway, this is still good for white. He goes knight b d7. I go f4, defending the knight, and he goes with bishop b4 check. At this point, yeah, the chess engine didn't really like f4 either. It thinks I should maybe do more with my pieces, I guess. I didn't look at that in detail, but it's somewhere around here. It seems like black is close to equal. Although he did just trade everything off here. I thought that was a little bit peculiar. Normally you want to keep a little more tension in the position. I could have gone knight c3 here, actually, if I wanted to keep all the pieces on. But I thought these trades were actually helping me, bringing my pieces forward, so I wasn't afraid of these trades. In fact, I kind of encouraged it with a3. He takes, I take. But I was really surprised when he kept taking. I mean, his queen could go back to c7, and that's fine. The chess engine rates all these positions as about equal, or maybe a slight edge to white. So nothing bad has gone on here, and black is okay because I didn't play the most accurately around move 9 and 10. But well, this trade where it brings my king up, maybe I still have a slight edge in this endgame with the more active king. Let's see, he went knight e4 check. Yeah, after this, I think the chess engine starts to like white again. This just helps me bring my king forward. I start getting my pieces active. And let's see, he went ahead and took on e5. That doesn't really change matters. I still have this advanced pawn here. And then he castled queenside. So he connects his rooks and gets a rook to a good position. And then the chess engine did not like my knight c3 move, although that did lead directly to a win, but only because of black's mistake. So I could continue here with g4. Let's see, he could support that pawn with g6. I could play b4. He might go knight g5 here, take, and then get a passed pawn in the center. And this is, enough for a slight edge for white, although, well, I could press for a win from this position. It's going to be a long game. There's actually a fair amount of force for an endgame. We have 2 rooks and a knight each, and my king is active. Active king and center control and a passed pawn is maybe a winning recipe, but it'll take a long time. So I went knight c3. Maybe I'm trying to rush things a little bit. He has a couple of good moves here. He just didn't play either of them. He could play his knight into g3. I was sort of expecting this one, rook to d1, and cancel that, rook to d1. And this is the kind of position I was expecting to go into. And I think this is all right. My king can actually come forward here, although he could try and get a pawn up here right away. And I could try and bring my king over to harass his knight, perhaps. Maybe his knight is a little out of play. Maybe my rooks are a little bit centralized. So slight edge to white, but still a long game. Or he could just take my knight. That was the other move I was expecting, and I had put my rook there to so I could take back with a rook and then go into this rook and pawn endgame, where again I think I have a slight edge just because my pawns are more advanced and my king is more active, but it's a pretty small lead at that point, and probably black can draw with good play. But he went g6 here. He just gave up a pawn for no particular reason. I don't know if he had an idea here. I take, he takes, and his next move, let's see, I take back. That's his next move. His next move is rook h to f8. So he puts a rook on an open file, which is logical, but of course I'm going to oppose it. He doesn't have any way to actually control that open file. He could put his rook up here on f5. Maybe that's a plan he should have considered. Then if I trade, at least he gets a majority of pawns over here on the queen side, and or king side, I guess it is. And then I would have to try and push forward in the center here while keeping those at bay. But I should have an advantage there too. Let's see, in this position he moved his king to c7. The chess engine like king to d7 here, actually. Maybe just coming over and immediately defending the pawn, because from c7 I just lift my rook up, just trying to activate it. I want to double my rooks, and I was just trying to look for a good square to lift it to. If he trades off the rooks now, then I get a passed pawn, so I don't think that's any good. He could bring the king over here now, but he's kind of wasted a move, and I'll still get to double my rooks. Or he could move the rook away, but then he'll run into trouble on the second rank. So it's just hard to give advice to black at this point. I think he's already, well, ever since he played g6 actually on move 19, he's technically been lost. But the trades here make my job a lot easier. So let's see, he went rook d to e8. He could have moved the other rook to e8 and maybe tried to avoid trades that way, but I could force a trade by doubling and putting a rook on the 7th rank there. Anyway, he went rook d to e8. I double. And he went ahead and took. I took. And then he went king d7. So the wanted to avoid more trades. He could lift his rook up now. I could play tricks on the back rank perhaps. But anyway, he brought his rook over here, and that allows rook f7 check. And this forces black into a king and pawn endgame where I'm a pawn up and just simply winning. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, if he moves his king, I'll just start gobbling up more pawns, so that loses as well. So he just went, he blocked and held on to his material. And so now I think I did a pretty good job. This is just kind of a technical win at this point, but you still have to win it. You still have to play the moves. And so I think there's some good lessons here. First of all, is you don't rush this break. You want to get it all set up. My break in the position is pushing the d pawn forward, and I want to make sure I don't get blockaded here, and I want my pawns to be as far advanced as possible. So let's see, I played g4, he went b6, and I went with g5. This is another nice technique you should always look for. This one pawn is restraining his pawns from coming forward, and now I have a reserve move if I need it for a tempo, and I made use of that later in the game, so that's important. Let's see, he played a6, I went b4, and he went a5. And now I've done as much as I can. I've pushed my pawns as far forward and as they can go without trading, and so it's time to play the break. So I push on with d5, and he took here first. I don't think this matters a whole lot. You just need to have enough pawns left at the end to win, which can be as few as 1 or 2 depending on the circumstances, and trading these pawns off can help me if it gives my avenue another way into the position. So for example, if the center should lock up with a passed pawn here, his king will be tied down. But if he can set up some sort of blockade and my king can never penetrate, then he could maybe hold that. But if there's a couple of files open over here, then I can, walk my king around like this and march into the position while his king is tied to a few squares in this area. That's another way to get a win here. So the trades actually helped me a little bit. Let's see, he went c5, and so I traded off one more pair of pawns. So now I do have a file that I can penetrate on if needed. But in this position, I could already calculate my way to win. I noticed that instead of pushing here, that would also win, by the way. Push here, his king goes here, and then just bring my king around this way and gobble up this pawn, or get an advantage on his king because his king is limited to where it can move to. So that would win. But I calculated a simpler win here. If I just take the pawn and he takes back. If he doesn't take back, then my king is coming forward to gobble up this pawn. So he has to take back. And then I have the tempo move that I prepared earlier, h4. And he has to move the king back. He has no good pawn move. This would just create a passed pawn for me over here, and he couldn't stop both of them. So he has to move his king. And wherever his king goes, I can just come forward. And now I'm winning this pawn. And, let's see, he went to d7. Doesn't really matter. My king still comes forward, and there's no way he can save this pawn. He went back to e7. I just grabbed here. He gets to step forward, but I just come back, and now I've got 2 passed pawns, and one of them will queen pretty shortly, so he went ahead and resigned at this point. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting game. Kind of just a game of a single mistake, that g6 move. But there was something to learn from the opening as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you later. Bye.